presentation coming up is something I'm really excited about, and you should too. It is about navigating employment whenever you're using kidney disease as your strength. So, have you ever sat there and thought, golly, this is like a part-time job or a full-time job? How could I turn this into like a profitable career? Well, we have two people with us today that have done that, and they're going to share their story. So, we have two people. They're going to speak about 15 minutes each. And we're going to start out with Chelsea Roman. Welcome, Chelsea. And Julie Hoggan will follow Chelsea. So, Suzette, if you would like to go ahead and give Chelsea the co-spotlight with me, I will give her a short introduction. I don't want to steal her thunder, but hi, Chelsea. Welcome. It is my understanding that you are a lifetime kidney warrior, that you actually did solo home hemo. You are a brave person, and that in 2019 you received a kidney transplant, right?
That's correct.
So, tell us how did you turn your journey with CKD into gainful employment?
So, well, as you mentioned, my journey started at birth. I was a 2-month premature baby, weighing 3 pounds, and was stillborn and revived. During those 5 minutes where I had no oxygen, it turned out that I had zero kidney function. And so I was born in Southern California. And at that time, I was then rushed to UCLA Medical Center, and they had never done dialysis on a preemie before. And so they were considering peritoneal dialysis at the time. This is in the early 80s. And they decided with my parents to maybe wait and see what would happen. And so they did a little bit of waiting, and I ended up being in the hospital for 2 months in an incubator. And I was able to regain a little bit of kidney function between 20 to 25%. From that point on, I was followed by nephrology, and throughout my childhood, would see nephrology every 3 months, would get labs drawn. And and it was when I turned 5 years old that my father passed away from lung cancer. And then my mother had to continue to care for a really sick child on her own. And so I went through childhood, didn't have any symptoms, knew about my disease, and my mother, thank God, she would, she had done her research and created a meal plan for me. And I was able to remain off of dialysis for 32 years. Um, so as my kidney function started to decline, and it was many, many, many times over my childhood that I was on the brink of starting dialysis, but I just never got to that point. And so when I turned 24, my mother passed away from ovarian cancer. And it was during that time that I was like, wow, cancer runs pretty rampant in my family. And I think I want to get tested for the BRCA1 gene, which is a high risk for ovarian and breast cancer. It turned out that I tested positive for the gene. And so while my kidney function was declining, I had opted to have a double mastectomy, have my ovaries removed because I knew that I was never going to have children, and that I did not want to deal with cancer while dealing with kidney disease or have cancer while having a transplant. So I wanted to prepare myself as much as I possibly could to make myself as healthy as I could so I wouldn't have to deal with these things down the road. And in the interim, it was probably 2013 when I went 2012 when I went and saw my nephrologist, and she said, you are getting pretty close to dialysis. Let's talk about your options. home dialysis. And I was like, home dialysis? This is amazing. I'm doing home dialysis because my parents were like, don't ever go into a dialysis center. You preserve your kidney function for as long as possible. So I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So she said, but in order to do the dialysis, you're going to need an access. And she said, you'll probably need a fistula. And I said, yes, sign me up. I want the fistula like yesterday. I want to be as prepared as possible. So I went and had to have the fistula placed. And I ended up not starting dialysis for another 4 years. And I was getting ready to do home dialysis. And so I was on vacation in 2017 and I started having symptoms. You know, I had the nausea, the itching from the phosphorus levels, just the feeling unwell, the metallic taste in my mouth. Um, and those symptoms were starting to become more and more persistent. And so I'm like, okay, maybe I need to call my nephrologist. So I called my nephrologist and I said, look, I need to start dialysis. I mean, I feel it. And they're like, okay, let's start you next week. So I was like, okay, I've got my mature fistula, let's go. And I ended up going through a transitional care unit where I learned about all of my options for dialysis. And I learned about peritoneal dialysis. I learned about transplant, although I had already been listed for transplant for a few years prior to that point. Learned about home hemo, learned about in-center, and learned about what would happen if I didn't do dialysis at all. And those were my choices. And so I decided to do home hemo, and I did it by myself. My husband was my care partner, but since he was working full time at that time, um, I decided to take care of the treatments on my own because it's my disease, you know, and I wanted to maintain that control, maintain the independence, and not be so tied down to a clinic. I wanted my life. I'm still fairly young. And it was during this time while I was going through training for home hemo, which is 4 to 6 weeks, I had seen my primary care doctor. And she had done a visit and she said, look, there's something going on with your thyroid. And I've been on thyroid medication for a long time. So she had sent me to an endocrinologist. And during that time, I got diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And so I was put on hold on the transplant list for about 6 months to a year until it was all removed. And then I was determined to be healthy enough to go back on the transplant list. And then I did home hemo for 2.5 years. And I did my treatments 4 days a week. And each treatment was about 2.5 hours. But I was able to do it in the morning. I was able to do it at night, however my schedule allowed. I traveled with my machine. I went to Hawaii. Went across the country multiple times. So it really allowed me this life that I didn't think was possible. So while all of this was happening, I started documenting my experience online, showing people how to use the home hemo machine on YouTube, sharing my story on Facebook, sharing my story on all social media platforms, because I thought it was important that people understood that, you know, people living with kidney disease can still have pretty normal lives. And so my nephrologist saw that. And my nephrologist said, hey, what do you think about being a patient advocate for the company that manufactures the home hemo machine? And I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. Yeah, I would love to talk to people about this because I'm so passionate about it. I'm doing it. And I want to be able to share with people that, hey, your life can be so much better. So, and he then introduced me to an amazing group of people. And I would share my story with patients and with their family members. I would go into the clinics and talk to the staff and do lunch and learns and talk with them about how to talk to patients about home therapies. And I did that for a couple years until I got a call out of the blue one day, and Fresenius Medical Care called me and said, hey, we really could use somebody like you. to share your experience and to help educate patients about what their options are for therapies wherever they are on their journey, whether they're just diagnosed or even if they're transplanted and they're looking at going back on therapy. And I said, yeah, that sounds amazing. Like I was not never had worked in the, you know, really ever thought about working in the renal industry. I'd worked in medical before, and I'd always been fascinated with being in the medical field because my life has been surrounded by the medical field. So I knew I wanted to get back in some sort of form. And this was a perfect opportunity for me to do that. And so today I work full time and talking to patients all day long about what their life can look like, what they may be facing, and then sharing my experience with them to not only um, bring them hope, to give them something to look forward to, something to, because as we all know, as patients, living with this disease can be scary. It can be dark at times. And the only thing I want is patients to see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Okay. That life doesn't need to be, life is what you make of it. And so I had decided that this was my calling. And I don't see myself ever working in another industry. I am always going to be involved in the kidney world. And I know that my story is going to change over time. And so I was very lucky to receive a transplant going on 6 years in November after being on the list for 7 years. And so that is a little bit about my story. And, to this, I also volunteer. I'm also on the board of directors for AAKP, which is the American Association of Kidney Disease Patients, and also the ESRD networks that I work very closely with. So I'm very involved, and I'm going to continue to do what I can to educate, um, enlighten, and just bring people's spirits up because, everybody needs that in their lives, especially when dealing with such a hard disease.
That's fabulous. Thank
Well,
you,
thank
Julie.
you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and let Julie share about what she's doing. And then if you can stick around, if people have questions, we'll let them answer after both of you have spoken. Does that work out okay with you?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Super, super. Okay, well, next then, let me introduce Julie Hoggan. And Julie Hoggan lives in Henderson, Nevada, with her husband Rich and her daughter Maggie. And Julie was fortunate enough to uh, really be active in her own health care. She had polycystic kidney disease and managed to find a way to get a preemptive transplant, something that in my journey I really, really wanted, but it was a real struggle back in 1999. So what Julie has done is that she is the co-founder of Square Knot, and she serves as a lead navigator, helping others get preemptive transplants just like she did. But I'm not going to steal any more of your thunder, Julie. You're a wonderful person. I know you're going to give us a tad bit of your story and then share what it is that you do at Square Knot and everything else. I know you volunteer as well. So if you'll take just about, no more than 15 minutes, and then we'll ask questions to both of you at the end. How's that work?
Okay, sounds
Okay, good.
good.
All right, super.
Thank you, Cher. I'm
Thank
so
you.
appreciative of the invitation to be here and to share some of my experiences. Um, I know when I think about kidney disease, we often think so much about about what it takes away from us and sort of the negative things about, we lose time and confidence in our future and, everything feels so uncertain. But I love talking about this because I feel like working in the kidney world has given so much back to me so that it's turned into a positive thing about having kidney disease for me. Um, I was a speech pathologist in my prior life, so I worked with patients who had swallowing problems and communication disorders. I worked at a hospital, and so I loved reading their medical records and sort of understanding what they've been going through. I love taking care of patients, educating them and their families, and sort of helping them, figure out, get through their swallowing problems, and their communication disorders and help them, get better. And it was also very flexible. I was able to be home a lot, take care of my daughter, and still work. So it felt like the perfect job and something I was maybe made to do. Like I talked about it that way because I loved it. Um, I was diagnosed with polycystic kidney disease at the age of 26. It's normally a I mean, it is a genetic disease, but it wasn't in my family. And so I saw a nephrologist, and basically the advice I was given was, well, in 20 years, just come back when your kidneys are failing. And I was like, that doesn't really seem like a good plan to me. So I started learning and trying to understand more about what this could look like. And of course, you're trying to plan for this scary unknown future. Um, would I be able to work? What do I need to do to plan for that if I can't? Would I be able to take care of my daughter? What would that look like? And so as I'm looking at her, I thought, gosh, if she has this, we can't wait around for 20 years. And so I went looking for a clinical trial, and I actually found one. And I participated in that for about 13 years until the drug became approved and is now used as the only treatment to slow the progression of PKD. But despite, having the advantage of being on that medicine all that time, my kidney function still fell. And when I hit a GFR of 20, I had learned even before that, I prepared a little bit. I talked to the transplant center and asked when I could be seen. But as soon as it hit 20, I asked my doctors to refer me to the transplant center where I live. Um, the education class that I went to right at the beginning of that process, they asked who here is already on dialysis, and everybody raised their hand in the room except for me and my friend next door to me. And she started that month. And so as I looked around, I was like, what's going on here? This is the recommended first treatment for kidney failure is transplant, and having transplant before dialysis is also the recommended treatment. And I had learned that online, but I didn't understand how the system worked. I worked in healthcare, but I hadn't worked in transplant. So, I was trying to find my way through just like everybody else, but I got very distracted from the class, and I just thought, well, when I'm through this, I have to figure out a way to help with this and get more people, figure out how to get them referred sooner, help them understand that this is the recommended way. Um, so that really stuck in my head. I also became listed at a second center, Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, and they started testing my donors right away. When I put out my search, it was amazing. All these people came running and texting and filling out the form and doing all these, just amazing things. It's so meaningful, to have friends and family willing it, to jump in to have surgery with you. I mean, it's so extraordinary. Um, One friend was declined for a minor health problem that luckily hasn't impacted her life. And then she continued helping, talking to the next person who was tested. I also had kind of a silent helper in the background, helping the second person, and her name's Lori. And she's a kidney donor herself. And she later became one of my colleagues at SquareNet Health, a navigator with me there. Um, so this person was being tested the second week in February of 2020, and I'd only been listed for 3.5 months, and I received a call for a deceased donor kidney, which is really unusual to have such a short waiting time. I was supposed to wait 3 to 4 years. It turned out they had a kidney for me. It was actually two little kidneys, which is called a pediatric en bloc transplant. I had never heard about this. I'd read a lot, but I did not know this was possible. And I also kind of thought maybe they had made a mistake, like that they shouldn't be calling me yet. So we argued about that for a little bit. And I asked her, I had this, person being worked up. And I said, well, can you ask the surgeon if they think I should take these little kidneys, even though I have a potential donor? But we're not a blood group match. So we would end up in a paired exchange. So you kind of, you don't know exactly how all that's going to go. And he did recommend that I take the offer, which I ended up doing. So my transplant happened on Valentine's Day in 2020. And of course, I'm forever grateful to my donor and their family for that gift, because it's undoubtedly, was the worst day of their lives. And, making that decision to save me and undoubtedly other people is just extraordinary. So I recovered, and during that time, the pandemic happened. And so the day I was discharged was the day the country shut down due to COVID. And so I saw my doctor, and he said, well, Julie, these kidneys look perfect. But if you go home and get COVID, you'll probably die or you'll lose the kidneys. So, of course, my family, we all took extreme precautions and were separated and, did lots of things to try to keep me and the kidneys safe. And when I got home, I was, watching TV like we all were and seeing my own hospital on TV with everybody in all of the gear to protect themselves. And I just thought, like, I'm not going to be able to go back. I mean, I'd been there for 24 years and it just seemed completely unsafe. It used to be my safe place and I loved being there. And I couldn't imagine taking these little kidneys there that I'm now responsible for. I knew I wanted to work in the kidney world, so I looked around a little bit, but I mean, I was stuck at home, and it sort of didn't feel like I had the right letters after my name. I wasn't a nurse, obviously wasn't a doctor, and so I couldn't figure it out. So I thought, well, I'm going to join some online support groups, attend a lot of webinars, and just, try to find ways to sort of get involved. I ended up joining a vaccine study for transplant patients that was surrounding the COVID vaccines. And out of that, there was this great group that was created online, and we were all talking together, those of us in the study, and that created lots of cool connections as well. But mainly I just sort of hung around and walked around my neighborhood, listened to audiobooks, and I had all this energy, and it just felt like I should be doing more. And then I actually attended an RSN support group, and I met a young woman who had also had a transplant recently, and we struck up a conversation, and she was also in the vaccine study group. And actually her mom is here with us today, watching. So yay, thank you, Nancy, for coming. She mentioned that she was moving to Henderson, Nevada, and I said, well, I live in Henderson, Nevada, which seemed a really weird coincidence because she was coming from the East Coast and she was coming for school. So we started chatting outside the group and, trying to help her find doctors and do all the things so that she could move here and get the care she needed. And one day I called her, and I just was expressing frustration about the system, kind of what I said before about people not making it to transplant evaluation before they started dialysis. And she said, oh, you should talk to my prior nephrologist, Elliot here. He, helped me when I was at Mass General to be transplanted before I needed dialysis, and he's building a new thing. So I was a little skeptical, but she kept kind of pestering me to call him or get in touch, and so I finally did. And I just shared my story about what happened in my education class and said, I'd love to try to fix things here. So, if there's something you're doing that I could implement here, I'd love to try. And so we met the next day, and like right away, I knew that something cool was happening. He wanted to bring transplant education out of the transplant center because usually you only get that when you get there. He wanted to bring it out into the community and support patients long before dialysis begins, when possible, and hire a company full of patient navigators, people like me who'd had transplants or who donated a kidney. And so that we understood what they'd been going through, and combined with him and his ability to assess, would they be a good candidate for a transplant? What are the barriers to transplant? What do they need to work on? We could help them through that. And then he also had a vision for technology that would help us do that as well, that would help support the navigators as we try to read these really long medical records. Patients like us, we have these 1,000, 2,000 page medical records. It's really hard to find all the specific information you need to get a patient assessed. So we needed to build things to be able to help us do that, and sort of change the system in a much bigger way. So of course, by the end of this, he asked me to come and help build Square Health for them, and I said yes. So it was just so exciting because I couldn't have even thought of a better situation to be in. Um, I was super excited to start seeing patients, but it turned out we had to build everything to get going. So we needed the infrastructure and sort of operations for the company and a medical practice to be able to get going, which meant we needed an electronic medical record. We needed HIPAA compliance and processes and forms and contracts signed with health plans and sort of all these things. I'd never done any of that before. And so it was really fun. We just had to go figure it all out. And so the two of us collaborated and, built all of these things. And it was so fun. Like, it was so fun to build something that I knew was going to be so meaningful and helpful to patients. We had lots of problems, lots of challenges, and a lot of the time I just spent trying to solve problems and build systems that would help us do our work. So I didn't know I would like operations of a company. I had no idea, because working in a hospital, all that's sort of done for you. So I've learned so much. It's been pretty amazing. Once we started seeing patients, that was a whole other thing. I joined every telehealth visit with the patient and doctor here. And, it's amazing to watch when a doctor really cares and spends the time to understand a patient, understand where they're coming from, and sort of see the barriers and why they're there, and really help to try to figure out a way through. He spent a bunch of time at Mass General fixing and changing their program in a way that has allowed many more people to get transplanted. And I can see, how all of his skills there and all of his skills with patients have just made such a big difference. And being able to sit with him for all these years and learn, I mean, it's like a fire hose of information. And I'm just so grateful that, to have all of that experience. The other really cool thing that's happened is we partnered with an AI company called Patients App, and I'm the transplant lead there. And we've collaborated to make this uniquely transplant-focused platform. And what it does is it takes all those medical records I was talking about, thousands of pages, for one patient, and it ingests all of that and analyzes it and pulls out all the things we've told it that transplant doctors and teams need to be able to assess a patient's transplant candidacy quickly. So it identifies the barriers. We have a quick summary that helps coordinators move patients quickly from referral to evaluation to listing, and it helps them keep up on changes to their health and that we can find in the medical record, as the navigators then help patients overcome barriers to transplant and find a living donor. Many of our patients have gone on to receive kidney transplants. Many of those are living donor transplants. And we've created relationships with transplant centers who trust us to support their patients, and they seek out our help. We had some really great, we had a poster session at ASN's Kidney Week last fall, and we've had even more patients transplanted since then. So it's been incredibly rewarding and successful as far as getting the patients through, and the support that the patients feel. They express to us all the time they don't know how they would do it without having the support. If you had asked me 5 or 6 years ago, would you ever work at a startup? I would have laughed and said, nope, definitely not. That is not in my wheelhouse. And, I didn't even realize we were a startup when I spoke to Elliot the first time. I just loved the vision and how patients were included. And so, I was willing to do anything to be part of this. So like that day I spoke to him first, I knew I had already become a transplant navigator before it was even all set up. I just knew that this is what I would be doing for the rest of my life. So when you think about if you think, gosh, I would like to work in the kidney world, I don't think, like me, I looked and thought, well, I don't belong here. My letters aren't right. I don't have the right experience. I don't think that's true. And I think that if you think about your skills and how they could transfer to any other company, they could also transfer to a company who works in the kidney space. One of the things I would suggest is looking for a guy named Tim Fitzpatrick on LinkedIn. He has his pulse he has like his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the transplant and kidney care, chronic kidney disease world. He follows everything out there, companies, policy, government, health insurance, all the different parts of the system. And he produces a newsletter every week to track what's happening. And it's incredible, the volume of information and his ability to kind of put it all together and talk about how it's meaningful. And he's always interested in hearing from people who are reading too and getting opinions. So it's a great spot to learn about sort of the bigger picture, and then specifically about all the kidney companies and kind of kidney adjacent companies that are working in the space. So you might be surprised to find how your skills could transfer to any one of those companies. His signals is the newsletter, is what it's called. And there's also a job board there. So companies post knowing that people wanting to work in the kidney world will be there looking. We need more patients working in kidney care. We really need them. And we live in this system and we totally understand the problems and the barriers that we face and the difficulties of having to live with the chronic kidney disease and sort of a chronic disease that impacts us forever going forward. Even if we receive a transplant, even if we do dialysis, we're dealing with this all the time. And there's so many parts of the system that don't work right for us. So we really have the best knowledge and should be at the table when decisions are being made, when systems are being built, and when people are deciding how our care is going to look. So if there's any way for people who have this experience, whether you're a family member, a friend, or somebody going through it yourself, I absolutely encourage you to look and see if there's some way that you can be involved. Of course, we can all volunteer, and that's awesome, and we can help patients individually. It's awesome. Like, all of those things are so important. And I run a support group here in Las Vegas, and I love doing that. But I also really do want to help change the system in a big way. And I've had a great model and partner to do that with at Square Knot Health, and at Patients App as well. They're looking to really make a big difference across the space.
Well, Julie, I see that you are making a difference. I believe that you are inspiring people right now. And, really, thank you so much for bringing out that we need to be heard. We need to, if we can step in and fill those places, we should, because it's not just for us, it's for other patients.